All right. We are here with Tim James, paleontologist, archaeologist, just a man of many talents, joining us from, are you in Los Angeles right now?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of downtown LA. I'm right off of Spring Street, which was historically Los Angeles's Wall Street. Now it's like EDM clubs and sushi restaurants. Mm.
What kind of building are you in right now?
Oh, it's cool. So it's a converted loft, but it was a bank built in 1922, and it was built literally for finance bankers. And then, of course, it got abandoned, and then I think they restored it sometime in the early 2000s. And yeah, now this is my apartment. We got a cool
Wait, so
loft.
that's your apartment?
Yeah, dude, you want to see the city view?
Yeah, let's check it out.
Let me see if I can actually. Yeah,
Oh, dude.
yeah. How about that, bro?
Wow.
I know that's California, right at your footsteps, or fingertips, or whatever. But yeah, so
Huh.
I've been happy, man. Like enjoying the West Coast.
Yeah, so
How's the
it's
North? Is it still snowing
it,
out there in Chicago?
dude, it's cold. It's like 35 degrees. The sun is out today, which is great. It rained yesterday. Around this time of the year, Chicago stays between like 25 and 50 degrees and gray for like 2 or 3 months. So I went to Mexico City, and then I got a trip to Miami coming up. So I'm exploring the
Hey,
warm weather areas.
hey, Miami's fun. I was there last summer. Make sure you go to Brickell and go grab yourself some Argentinian empanadas and go see the Miami Circle while you're down there. One of the coolest archaeological sites in the country. People don't even know it's there.
Wait, so this will be my third time in Miami. Every time I go to the Frost Museum, and they
Nice.
have I just love it there. You have spectacular views, and they have the paleontology of like the fauna that used to live in Florida. So these big like saber-toothed cats, and it's like, oh man, it's so cool. You said Brickell though? There's a
Yeah.
site over there?
There was a giant indigenous village site. It was the Tequesta people, I believe, but they had a massive village site right at the heart of the Miami River, and right where it entered into Biscayne Bay, and that was their main village site. And there's actually still remnants of that village site that have been preserved, even though that area is smack dab in the center of Brickell in downtown Miami. So Miami's actually been one of the premiering cities that has led the way when it comes to cultural resource management. They were doing this way back in the 80s. So, Miami actually has a really rich cultural heritage. If you walk around, for example, there's a Trader Joe's right in downtown Miami. There's actually preserved indigenous post holes that the indigenous people made to create a kind of boardwalk like society. And what they did is they put conch shells on the end of these long poles, and they just stabbed them into the ground over and over and over again and utilized them as drills until they made the post holes, because they didn't have any access to things like, rocks or any lithic resources. So they use shells for everything. But the city of Miami has actually done a phenomenal job preserving some of those sites all over the downtown area. So if you know where to look, some piece of dirty glass on the ground might actually be hiding an archaeological site, much like Europe.
Huh. Interesting. That's gonna give me some more stuff to do in Miami. I'm looking for more different stuff. I'm not much of a beach guy. I like exploring just the cultural resources of every city and the people and just the vibe. I love that.
Well, they've done they've done studies, and the people who are of Cuban descent in Miami are actually closely related to the indigenous group that initially occupied the Miami area. So those people were actually taken by the Spanish and then sent to Cuba. So unlike a lot of major American cities, some of
Hmm.
the main population centers in Miami are actually related to have a direct connection with their indigenous population. Really
Fascinating.
cool.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay, so it's been a while since you've been on.
As
I know you live in LA. Where else have you been?
Dude, I've been all over the place. I worked in Colorado. I worked in New Mexico. Let's see, I was in Virginia. I worked on a Civil War battlefield outside of Richmond. And I worked on some Cherokee sites in North Carolina. And since then, I've just been back here in LA, but I've been working all over California, up in the desert, up in the redwoods and the Sierras. So, and down on the coast and in the middle of the cities, so, everywhere pretty much. I'm a busy guy these days.
You have a particular set of skills. Why don't you reintroduce yourself a little bit for maybe viewers or listeners that haven't listened to your previous episode? Your last one was fantastic, the way you described your skills.
I'm glad. I don't know. I mean, I'm Tim. I'm a paleontologist. I'm originally from New Mexico. I went to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. But in a lot of ways, I was trained in the indigenous styles of archaeology. So, looking at archaeological resources and even paleontological resources through the eyes of indigenous communities, and understanding first and foremost how working with those resources affects those communities, as opposed to working with, just purely academics. So being in New Mexico and going to that university helped me develop a very strong foundation for the rest of my career. From there, I went and I did internships all over the United States. So I've dug up dinosaurs in Wyoming, used to be a museum curator in South Dakota. Many of the Western states, I've swashbuckled with the buffalo, so to speak. So, I do a lot of traveling, but yeah, I do a lot of archaeology and paleontology. And frankly, I'm just really passionate about science communication. For me, I'd like to see a brand new generation of people get involved with the field. And if there's any way I can share how passionate I am about this, research into the natural history world, that's all I'm looking to do, really. So, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I'm not great at describing myself, but yeah.
That was pretty good. That was pretty good. And you are passionate about natural history and science and understanding where the world has been. It can help us better understand where we're going and make decisions. And it's fantastic. Yeah, when I was in Mexico City, I went to two of the biggest things I wanted to do was go to the Natural History Museum there, and also the pyramids in Teotihuacan with the Pyramid of the Sun and the Moon.
Did you know they found human sacrifices all around the entire base of the Pyramid of the Sun? Aztec, soldiers actually went and kidnapped Mayan citizens and then butchered them in sacrificial ways, and then led their bodies all around the Pyramid of the Sun. It's actually a recent discovery last year.
Well,
yeah, pretty brutal. But yeah, I've always wanted to go to Mexico City. I've heard it's even bigger than New York. Like, it's just,
dude, it's huge. It's huge. Yeah.
That's saying something. I mean, you're not a small city guy. You're in Chicago, It's
not
huge, but it's big.
It's huge. Like, to get to like certain places, we're taking like 3 trains and a bus, 2 buses, 2 trains.
Wow.
Yeah, really interesting.
How was the food there? I'm sure the food was phenomenal.
It's pretty good. I was staying with a friend's family, so like they cooked me meals like every single day. It was fantastic. And then we would go out to restaurants and they would tell me like, oh, try this right here and do this. And then it was good. It was good.
That's super cool, man. That's super cool.
Yeah.
I really want to get out and see more of Central America myself. I'm planning on doing a guest speaking tour in Panama later on next year.
Really?
So, yeah, I actually am now represented by a talent agency that specializes in archaeologists and paleontologists. And
dude, that's fantastic.
I can't say which cruise line yet, but it's one of the higher cruise lines. And they booked me as a guest speaker on like the entire Panama Canal cruise. So I'll be giving lectures on archaeology and paleontology and seeing the world. That's a new endeavor I've been trying out.
it's so cool to see how you're able to take your knowledge and skills and combine them in ways to like seek other opportunities that interest you and that align with your overall vision and dream. It's really interesting to see.
Oh, I'm glad. I mean, tell you the truth, man, I just get bored. Like, I'm one of those guys. Maybe I'm just really hard to please. Like, for me, getting my career in paleontology for the longest time, it was like a dog chasing a car, right?
Yeah.
The dog does not expect to catch the fucking car. Like, you don't expect to get the dream job that quickly, right? So now that I have it, maybe I'm a little bored.
A little bored.
A little bored. It's time to chase something new. So, for me, it's really nice now that I'm able to pay my bills working as a paleontologist to be able to look for different ways that I can utilize that information and that knowledge to, open up different doors. And in Los Angeles, this is a perfect town for that, because you can be an actor, archaeologist, paleontologist, ventriloquist or whatever, and nobody looks at you sideways.
Huh.
You just fit right in.
Yeah. Tell me more about Los Angeles. What has it been like living there?
Oh man, I've adapted to the crushing pressure.
The pressure?
The pressure. No, Los Angeles, it's a beautiful city. People for a major city are extremely friendly. We have fantastic weather. It's beautiful. It's also like the other side of it is like the apocalypse is always kind of happening outside. There's always like madness in every direction, but I don't know. There's an old quote on Pershing Square that likens Los Angeles to being at the ringside seats at a circus, and I'd have to agree with that.
So what do you do in your downtime for fun?
I like going to punk rock shows. Lately, I've been really into modern art of all things. I just went down a really deep rabbit hole into like Picasso and some of the different painters represented within like Cubism and stuff like that. But that's just kind of a hobby. I'm really into music. All my roommates were all musicians, were all artists. So I don't know, man. I've been painting, going to museums, going to the beach, hiking, like just living my best life. I mean,
it sure sounds like it.
You can go in any direction, and there's food halls, there's like galleries, there's pop-ups, there's there's everything. So for me, I'm just like living my big city life and having a good time, doing a lot of writing. I'm working as a science journalist on the side now. So every week I produce new stories. And I've been doing a lot of acting too, believe it or not. So I worked on like a commercial with this NFL linebacker. His name was Sean Merriman. He was like,
I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah, he totally like. I didn't know who he was until like after the commercial. Like the whole time we're all hanging out and we're all breaking bread. Like I just thought he was an actor playing a linebacker. Like he was just hanging out with the rest of us, man. And I'm just working background. So I'm assuming if this guy's talking to me, he's also just working background. But no, it turns out that like he used to play for the Chargers. Rams.
Yeah, he was really good too.
He was really good. I watched some of his tapes afterwards, and I was like blown away. I've been doing that. I did like a K-pop music video. I've done a bunch of game shows since then. I did like Let's Make a Deal with Wayne Brady. I did You Bet Your Life with Jay Leno. That's kind of cool. So I've just been kind of like expanding my my horizons, man. Just kind of.
You are a true Renaissance man.
It's Hollywood right
now. Is there a dream archaeological or paleontological site in the world that would be like a dream to work on?
For me, if I got to get my hands on anything that was Egypt related, I feel like that would be really cool. Getting to work, especially in Luxor, um, that would really be amazing because Luxor, that's a Valley of Kings, and that was the first holy city on earth. So, the temple structures that they have in that part of Egypt are really unlike anywhere else on earth. So, getting to work in Egypt would really be a dream come true. But in college, my major wasn't archaeology and it wasn't paleontology, it was paleoanthropology. So, if I had a dream site to work on, it would probably involve hominids. Whether that be Neanderthals or Homo erectus or Australopithecines or anything like that, I'd just really love to get to work on anything paleoanthropologically related to us. Because it's one thing to work on a fossil of a dinosaur, but to work on something that you have a direct, relationship with and is a predecessor of your own species, to me, it holds a certain level of significance that and a connection that's not necessarily there when you're digging up a dinosaur or a mammoth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm. Like the Rising Star Cave in South Africa, for example. Like some of the artifacts they found from, I believe it was Homo naledi there. I mean, the field methods they used were brilliant. They basically were able to find where certain parts of the artifacts, not certain parts of the skeleton had actually taphonomically fell deeper into the cave, and they were able to process all of the sediment into the cave in order to save as much of that hominid as possible. And that's just really, it goes to show that like Lee Berger and, all of those African paleoanthropologists are really carving out amazing legacies right now. And I have a hard time sitting here in the West Coast, like, just working on mammoth bones and working with Chumash artifacts, watching all these new discoveries come out of, Africa and Eurasia and Jamaica, not Jamaica, but in Indonesia and Java and all these places, because I would love to get my hands on anything related to, human evolution. That's always been my interest. Yeah. That's part of the reason why I've studied elephants, because in a lot of ways, I feel like elephants are very similar to humans when it comes to their social structure, some of their quote unquote cultures, how they go to graveyards, how they, have remembrance, and how they actually, different herds of elephants actually have different dialects and accents for different regions. Yeah, that's why I've studied them. But really, I'd love to be studying some early humans.
Early humans.
Yeah, like the time in history that most interests me, maybe 50,000 years ago, because at this time you had Homo erectus, you had Neanderthals, and you had the earliest Homo sapiens all coexisting in Europe at the same time. I would love to learn more about how those different groups of hominids interacted with each other. Just think about that time. You think racism now is bad. Can you imagine if there's two other species of human coexisting in the same ground that you're trying to live on? It's pretty wild.
So what's the consensus of how Homo sapiens survived and the other ones didn't?
I think a lot of paleoanthropologists would tell you that we kind of bred them into us, and we're smarter. I mean, and we're also, frankly, in my opinion, I think Homo sapiens, our main benefit was the fact that our facial muscles and our structures are designed to look somewhat pretty. We're supposed to be more charismatic than the other species of hominid. I think that really played to our advantage. I think essentially we out-hunted, outcompeted and interbred with other hominid species. And essentially there wasn't much, purebred, Neanderthals or Homo erectus left afterwards. That would be my guess. Of course, it's a theory, and every extinction, it's not, singular cause. It's always a culmination of events that leads to an extinction of a species. But to me, that would be my best guess. We're mean, man. We're Homo sapiens are not to be messed with. We're the winner. We're the
Yeah, I mean,
baddest
I
bloke
was
on the
thinking about
block.
that on the bus ride today.
Oh,
It's like how we just, I'm taking the bus on Lakeshore Drive and then Michigan Avenue and just looking around all the buildings, all the construction, how humans are able to manipulate their environments to appease their goals or imaginations or shared visions. It's pretty fascinating.
it's amazing, man. Like no other species
We
on
don't think
Earth.
about that enough.
Yeah, I mean, our colonies are bigger than even ant colonies. We blow them out of the water. Like we're insane. No other mammal even comes close to living in the density and proximity that we. It's nuts. It's like there's us and then there's insects when it comes to our population density and our built environment.
Yeah.
The only other animals that even come close to altering their environment as much as humans is actually beavers, because beavers
Okay.
and their constructions of dams actually really vastly alters an entire environmental landscape. And they're the only other species that probably has as much impact as humans, or had before we hunted them all out.
So how much do you think the human body has changed since the 50,000 years ago that you had mentioned?
So the human body has actually changed rapidly over time. In fact, forensic anthropologists have looked. We used to have a grand standard of determining ancestry and race through looking at the skeleton of different people, because different regions of the world used to have different skeletal aspects to their bodies. This was useful information. A lot of this data was collected from World War I and World War II because we had a lot of access to bones and bodies back then. Since World War One and Two, our skeletal structure, in all parts of the world, has actually evolved and changed as a result of becoming a more homogenized culture. So, just in the span of less than 100 years, our skeletal bone structure has changed immensely. So, if you imagine that, and you realize that like each different generation can see rapid changes, and then you apply that to human history, you can understand why some of the earliest Homo sapiens skeletons that have been found, fossilized Homo sapiens from caves in Israel and Morocco dating to around 300,000 years ago, they actually show much larger and much more robust features. And in fact, looking at an endocast of the brains of these Homo sapiens will show that their brains were probably much more likely to be more aggressive and more confrontational and less social than modern Homo sapiens. So over 300,000 years of human history, we've essentially gone from being the wild variety of Homo sapiens to being the domesticated version of Homo sapiens. Our bone structure has become less robust, and instead our bodies have become more focused on our facial muscles and our general looks. So essentially we're just becoming prettier, smaller, and more social, which with each coming generation, similar to how we work to breed cats or dogs. We're just doing it ourselves through our
That
own
is
selection.
interesting. So then the question I would ask is, with the introduction of, mobile devices, screens, how do you think the human body will be different 100 years from now?
So that's a really great question. I think the major changes of our human body won't necessarily come from our technology, but they'll come from the consequences of climate change. We've actually looked at famine in the past. And part of the reason I'm actually a shorter guy is I looked at it in my genetic record. And it's because if you have generations that starved, even the great grandparents who starved during childhood or during their teenage years, it can actually still affect the stature of their youth several generations onwards. So that happened in my family with the potato famine in Ireland. So I would imagine that, with our massive population, and and less water and less arable land for growing material, we would probably see the human stature somewhat shrink a little more. But who's to say? I mean, we could have our new technology has also allowed us to have social connection in a way never before seen. So what I think is going to happen is through dating apps, we're going to see sexual selection go into overdrive. And we're really going to start to see, different facial features, different body features that are more commonly, pleasing to a lot of groups. We might start to see those really represented more within, each coming generation. But who knows? We're also expected to have a population decline now, like not through violent means. They're just the boomer population is expected to die out in most countries. We're not seeing new populations fill them. So I don't know how that's going to affect it. But I think technology will definitely play a part. I'm more interested to see how things like AI will affect human culture, because if we get an AI that's good enough to do people's work for them, what is that going to do for our societies? Because once we make that change, that's the first time that we've really created a bunch of extra time for our society to further stratify. Part of the reason why we have all these specialized trades now is because of the adoption of agriculture that allowed people to have extra time to look into different traits and different skills and different hobbies. So I'm really interested to see, once technology progresses a little bit further, and less people are really needed to do a lot of major jobs. I'm interested to see how that affects art. I'm interested to see how that affects culture. I don't know, stuff like that.
Yeah, that is interesting. Go back to this dating app thing that you mentioned.
I mean, for me, this is just me. This is just my stoner thoughts, right? Stoner thoughts of a scientist smoking a joint and realizing, wow, all of these people are choosing mates based on, very superficial initial things. I'm sure if we continue doing that for several more generations, we're going to start to see certain traits represented more than others, just because that really, takes sexual selection, and it goes from you just have people to choose from in your general circle or your friend group or your town to having choice over the whole world. It's really gonna, I think it'll further change humanity. We're probably just gonna see the human population just get more prettier and more domesticated as a result of this. Probably gonna see more facial muscles, more desirable features for different regions.
Okay, you say facial muscles.
Yeah.
Like what? I know there's muscles in the face, but is there a way to like work those muscles or something that gets it into a more appealing?
Exactly. It's not necessarily that, but it's just, it's just one of the things that comes from like the general skeletal structure of the face. And it's just one of the things that, how do I say, it's how we emote. It's one of our ways of emoting, right? So that's one of the things that's been evolving since, Homo sapiens first came in, to the group, because one of the best ways to disarm a, hostile individual is by reasoning with them. And if you're more social, and if you have disarming features, you're probably much more likely to persist and carry on your genes, which is why we've seen this in the past. But of course, all of this is anecdotal. I mean, this is just me spitballing and thinking, but I'm sure that'll have an effect. I mean, anything that we do that messes up Maslow's hierarchy is going to have an effect.
How do you think AI would affect paleontology?
I don't want to think about that. I think it would be really great for looking at different fossil collections. But most importantly, I'd love to see AI help aid the process in resurrecting mammoths and extinct species, and helping to connect, fragmented genetic code that allow us to reconstruct that genetic code to, put that into an embryo of an Asian elephant, reproduce a mammoth. I'd love to see AI's aid with that. Yeah, I think AI would probably be really useful for paleontology. Might break down some phylogenetic arguments that have been going on for generations. Might be nice.
Phylogenetic? What is that word?
Oh, so phylogenies in paleontology are just really fancy way of saying the trees. The different, think of all of evolution as the tree of life. Phylogenies are branches of different animals' stories on that tree of life, right? So the T-Rex has a certain phylogeny that goes to all of its ancestors. So every animal that has a ancestor has phylogeny. We were talking about human phylogenies earlier by talking about extinct hominids.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Where do you think new answers will emerge out of in the world? Like answers to the past. What areas of the world do you think they would emerge most likely from?
Well, I know that the best technology we have in archaeology right now for determining answers is coming from Lidar surveys. So the region of the world that has the best untapped discoveries is different from the region that can give us the best discoveries, right? Those are two different things.
Wait.
Go. Part of the world, for example,
what about that again?
So if we use ground penetrating radar if we use LIDAR in the Amazon or all over the world, if we're able to do LIDAR maps of the entire globe, then we'll be able to determine and find lost cities everywhere we look, pretty much. Because LIDAR is perfect for finding, human manufactured remains of structures in heavily wooded or even sand dune rich environments. But the place where we can find the most spectacular artifacts is not necessarily in the cities we find doing LIDAR surveys. It's in what I think should be a huge international push, and that's in the permafrost, which is rapidly melting. And the permafrost holds, preserved humans. It has preserved art tools. It has preserved mammoths. It's got preserved cave bears. It's got a almost pristine record of the entire ice age within its boundaries. And part of the methane that we're seeing released into the Earth's atmosphere from the decay of the permafrost is a result of these biological material decaying. And I can't help but imagine that a lot of that material in the decaying permafrost is probably really invaluable artifacts that will never ever be seen again. So, we really should be doing LIDAR surveys of all the unexplored portions of Earth to determine where and when the extent of these massive population centers were. And then we should be expanding research in the tundras. What I'd like to see happen worldwide for, really expanding archaeological resources is I'd like to see more countries institute cultural resource management laws like we have in the United States. So I'd like to see more countries that before you build a skyscraper or subway, they actually have people go out and try to preserve the material there. Because if we had a global initiative to preserve cultural material and fossils in all developing countries and in all countries on the UN, for example, we'd be able to see archaeology completely skyrocket with the amount of usable data. And it would preserve so much because, in all of these cities that are rapidly, densifying and urbanizing, there's also layers and centuries of history underneath those cities that is oftentimes being completely destroyed. I mean, look at what Egypt's doing. They're building an entire another capital and they
Mhm.
haven't had very much cultural resource management done in the area where they're building the capital, but they're building an entire other new Cairo.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have all of these examples going on across the world. So, if we invested in LiDAR surveys, and then if we invested in, looking in regions of the world where we might have non-renewable resources that are rapidly being destroyed in archaeological context, and then if we just actually looked at the way that we develop our cities and our infrastructure in general, and in ways that works with science as opposed to against it, I think we could really see massive changes. And the more we understand our past, the more answers that gives us into addressing the problems of the future. So, for me, I see it as a win-win.
What's the process of LiDAR? And
Oh, so
what's
LiDAR,
its range of capabilities?
yeah. So what LiDAR does is it sends laser beams. You basically send a drone up into the air, and what it does is it conducts a survey over an entire plot of land. Basically, just flies all the way around, just filling up the entire parcel. And what it does is it sends these laser beams down that hit the surface of the ground, and then it sends that data back up. Essentially, what that does is it makes all of it allows you to peel all the vegetation off of the surface and just look at the ground disturbances themselves. And oftentimes those ground disturbances represent archaeological features like terraces, cities, roads, and any number of important infrastructures for indigenous communities. And so that technology allows us to pretty much strip an entire rainforest without cutting down an entire tree.
So it's for like big stuff, not like some arrowheads in the ground, right?
No, not
Okay.
necessarily. No. What we still have for arrowheads in the ground is the same methods we've always used, sending a field technician out there to go do a pedestrian survey. But who knows? Maybe we'll have a robot or a drone do it in the future, but I doubt it. I feel like that's more expensive than a tech.
Yeah. Huh. What's something coming up that you're looking forward to? Digging wise.
So I have a few projects going on right now. Until 2028, I'll be pretty busy with my current project. And so I'm not digging anything per se. But
You're thinking 5 years. You got 5 years. Wow.
Well, I mean, I'm the lead paleontologist for the LA Metro subway construction. So we have a long period of development before those subway tunnels are completed. So I'm not really looking at actually digging stuff out, but I'm looking at monitoring the construction of the excavation of these tunnels, and I'm anticipating finding lots of stuff. I wish I could say more about the stuff I've already found, but I'm contractually obligated and I can't. But yeah, so that's my current job. So I couldn't be more excited. I mean, for me,
That's so exciting. So the
tunnel,
things that you were mentioning before about, when you're developing, taking the time beforehand to see if there's any cultural significance or resources, just check it to make sure that's what you're doing in Los Angeles.
Oh,
For the
absolutely.
subway. Wow.
And I'm happy to say that California actually leads the world when it comes to preserving our fossil heritage and our archaeological heritage. So we actually work in direct communication with the tribes, developers, and the city. And we all work together to make sure that each project is done lawfully, respectfully, and is able to preserve as much as the data as possible. The city of Los Angeles and the state of California in general is really focused on preserving as much of our collective heritage as possible. Now, of course, sometimes it's part of the reason why housing is a little expensive here. We work under CEQA, which also has, negative repercussions. I do believe that CEQA does need to be ratified, but I think the cultural resource legislation in CEQA, as well as the paleontology resource legislation, in fact, if anything, paleontology needs to be stronger. Both of those are very strong. But yeah, I'm working under CEQA in California. But CEQA is just under, that's the California Environmental Quality and Protection Act. And the rest of the United States is actually protected under one of Nixon's laws, believe it or not, under the Environmental Protection Act. And Section 106 preserves all artifacts across the country. Unfortunately, it does not preserve fossils. So, yeah, that is what I'm doing. I'm monitoring construction.
Huh. I think we talked about this before, but living here in the Midwest, there's not the fossil richness of other places. Is that because of the glaciers wiping things out?
So there's a few different reasons for that. And I wouldn't necessarily say the Midwest is lacking in fossil richness. In fact, the
dinosaurs
Cleveland
maybe,
Trail,
right?
Yeah. It is lacking some dinosaurs, but there's a reason for that. Well, much of the Midwest was actually covered by the Western Interior Seaway from the Middle Jurassic to the end of the Cretaceous period. So you were underwater during that time. So maybe you didn't have dinosaurs. You still can find dinosaurs. But areas like Kansas are very rich for pterosaur fossils, which are, Pteranodon comes from Kansas.
Yeah.
From the Niobrara Chalk, which is remains of the Western Interior Seaway. But you're right about the glaciation. The glaciation did destroy a lot of the sedimentary remains of Appalachia, which would have been the continent that the dinosaurs would have lived in the eastern side of the country. Because during the Cretaceous period, the United States was split into two continents. Well, Laramidia being the western portion of the U.S., which is where T-Rex comes from. It's where Triceratops and Stegosaurus and all of our most known
legends,
South Dakota, Utah. I mean, all of these places were smack dab right on the coast of Laramidia. But we haven't had much fossils from the Cretaceous or the Mesozoic era in the eastern part of the United States because of glaciation. And also it's a mountainous environment. So the Appalachians would have still existed within the time of the dinosaurs. They would have been much higher. They would have been almost as tall as the Himalayas at that time. So, you still had this preventing a lot of sedimentary remains from being washed up. But every now and then, dinosaurs are still known to be found in the Midwest. In fact, I think Missouri just named one of their first dinosaurs a hadrosaur. I think it was Missouriensis something.
Interesting.
So there are dinosaurs in the Midwest, but they're not as common as in other parts. The Midwest, in my opinion, if you're going fossil hunting in the Midwest, you should be looking for Dunkleostes in the Cleveland Shale. There's no beating placoderm fishes. Those things are so cool. Or, some of the, shales around Chicago are famous for the Tully monster, which is the Illinois state monster.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
And those are, I got to say, they're pretty charismatic. I have a friend in Colorado who collects them.
Nice. Wisconsin. I'm from Wisconsin. A lot of woolly mammoth, I want to say.
Michigan, Wisconsin. I think they've even found a decent amount of Ice Age fossils in Chicago as well. So you will find that material. In fact, I worked with a really well-preserved mastodon that was collected by the University of Michigan. And we actually had that same skeleton on display at the World Fossil Finders Museum in South Dakota that I used to work on.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was a lot of animals. There was a lot of Ice Age flora and fauna in the
Ice Age for sure.
Region. Yeah. Not a lot of dinosaurs, but that doesn't mean that you can't find some bones in a gravel pit. Or it doesn't mean you can't find an isolated pocket every now and then. I think New Jersey just found a fossil deposit, and they have some dinosaur bones in Maryland as well. So you never know. Every now and then, crazy things can happen with geology. I mean, glaciers are not an exact science. They'll leave little tiny smidgens. I've always wanted to go prospecting in certain parts of Wisconsin that have some of those remaining pieces of rocks that haven't been completely glaciated. think it's by not Kenosha, but by the Minnesota border.
Okay.
Mhm. Southwestern, maybe a little bit
Okay.
south. It's been a while since I've been in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
I like Madison.
If one is visiting Los Angeles, aside from La Brea, what are some other good paleontology sites?
Oh, that's a great question. We have a bunch here. I would recommend, if you're not afraid to get out of the city, and if you have the patience of a saint that allows you to sit on freeways for an ungodly amount of time, I have 3 recommendations. My
Okay.
first would be the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, just because it's a fantastic little museum. They have a great little paleontology display. And that's also where the pygmy mammoth that they found on Santa Rosa Island, that's where it's on display, and it's completely mounted. It's a sight to behold. So the Santa Barbara Natural History Museum in Santa
Okay.
Barbara, phenomenal. It's the American Riviera. And then you have the Raymond Alf Museum. So when you're at the Raymond Alf Museum, I highly recommend checking out Baby Joe. They have a Parasaurolophus, a baby Parasaurolophus. So that's a hadrosaur, duck-billed dinosaur, with a crest on the back of its head. And this dinosaur is completely articulated. And they found it in the Comparowitz, in the same area I used to work on my second internship. And yeah, so a 77 million year old baby articulated Parasaurolophus skeleton. I actually just got back from a world tour in Japan, so I would highly recommend it. And then last but not least is the Western Science Center. Now it's in Hemet, which is way the fuck out of the LA area. It's out in what we call the Inland Empire, but it's really even farther out than that. It's in Riverside County. It's out there. But this museum is phenomenal. They have some dinosaurs that they've dug out of New Mexico. They actually have multiple holotypes on display. So this museum has been responsible for finding new species of dinosaurs in New Mexico. Not only that, but they have all of the remains from the Diamond Valley Project, which was the construction of this reservoir in Hemet that actually helped them find one of the largest Ice Age bone beds in all of California. And what they've done is use that as an opportunity to build one of the best natural history museums in Southern California, or in the country, really. And I highly recommend visiting. You can actually get collections tours, and everything there is truly stunning. They have one of the best representations I've seen of artifacts collected from our not artifacts, but fossils collected from our public lands. And their artifact displays are actually one of the only museums I've seen here in California that correctly illustrates how the indigenous peoples here actually lived. So I am a huge fan of the Western Science Center. They have helped me do a lot of work over the years since I've been here. I go there, I process sediments. I've been in the collections. Leah Collins, their curator and lab manager, she's just fantastic. And they're really leading the way when it comes to hiring Gen Z people and getting the youngest people involved in paleontology. Not only that, but they're training, high schoolers and even middle schoolers in field methods, in scientific, specimen processing, and all of the different stuff that goes into working as a paleontologist. So when these kids graduate high school, they'll actually be trained in fossil preparation. They'll be trained in fossil prospecting, and they'll be ready to go into their careers with a background that many of their peers don't have. So yeah, those 3 museums, I mean, they're really doing great. But the Western Science Center, fantastic. You can't go wrong with the the Natural History Museum of LA County too. It's like the American Museum of the Smithsonian or the Field. It's just it's a lot like the Field Museum.
Okay.
The Field Museum's a little bigger, but this it's really good.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
But you should also check out the Getty Villa while you're here, because what it is a reconstructed J. Paul Getty, who's this big oil magnate in Los Angeles, and of course, LA it was built off of oil. I mean, we've all seen the pictures of Venice Beach with all the oil derricks. Anyway, this guy used all this money to reconstruct a palace brick by brick from Herculaneum, from Pompeii and Herculaneum. and he has a completely reconstructed Roman villa that houses one of the best Mediterranean art collections in the world. So if you're ever in Santa Monica or Pacific Palisades and you want to feel like a Roman centurion, I highly recommend going to the Getty Villa and just standing in their garden. They've actually had paleobotanists come in and determine which plants they should plant in their garden to best represent what Romans would have had in their house. So
Wow.
yeah, that museum is really something else. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, Los Angeles has the third most museums of any city on earth after Moscow and Paris. So, you know, you could
That
really
is a fun
say a lot.
fact.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. Of course, it's the entire LA metro area, of course, but still. And they're from all different topics, from modern art to paleontology.
Yeah.
And everything in between.
Well, this has been fantastic.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having me, man.
well, one of my favorite questions to ask guests is what's something you're curious about recently before we conclude?
Something I'm curious about lately. It's a good question. I've been really interested in the discovery of these new ostrich eggs that they just found in the Negev desert on the Egyptian
Okay.
border of Israel. They date to around 7,000 to 8,000 years. But we're trying to, you know, they're trying to understand how the domestication of ostriches occurred. And right now I'm kind of going down the whole rabbit hole of trying to understand how that happened myself. So that's one of the things I'm really curious about is, you know, how early humans domesticated ostriches.
So what's something you learned from it?
Well, I mean, I just started learning about this. Like I just
Okay.
read the article earlier today, but yeah, I mean, we've been eating ostrich eggs for like 8,500 years. So pretty exciting, yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much for coming back on, Tim. Always
Yeah,
a
of course.
pleasure and a delight talking with you.
Always, man. I appreciate this. If you're ever in LA, we got to grab a drink
For sure. Thank you.
or a coffee. I know a good spot. It's a Swedish cafe in a Art Deco building. Then knock your socks off. If you want to see something cool, Google the Eastern Columbia building. I know you'll probably get a kick out of that.